for his love. Imhotep.
Ever wondered how ancient Egyptians survived 120-degree desert heat without dying of heat stroke? Well, they were actually cooling geniuses. And no, they didn't have hidden AC units buried in their pyramids. Their solutions were way more brilliant than you might think. Let's start with their architecture, because this is where things get really impressive. Ancient Egyptian houses were basically the world's first central air conditioning systems. They built their homes from sun-dried mudbrick, which sounds simple until you realize this material has thermal mass properties that modern builders pay thousands of dollars to replicate. These walls were incredibly thick, sometimes up to 2 feet, and they worked like a natural thermostat. During the scorching daytime, the walls absorbed heat so slowly that the interior stayed cool. Then at night, when desert temperatures plummeted, these same walls released stored heat to keep the house warm. Talk about energy efficiency with zero carbon footprint. But the real genius was in the details. Every Egyptian house had walls covered in white lime plaster. Modern thermal imaging of preserved buildings shows this wasn't just for looks. It reflected up to 80% of the sun's heat. Compare that to your dark roof shingles that turn your attic into an oven, and you start to see who the real engineers were. They also built their windows completely differently than we do. Instead of big glass panels that let in heat, they made tiny openings placed high up on the walls. This created what scientists now call a stack effect, where hot air naturally vented out the top, while cooler air got pulled in below. Your smart home ventilation system? Ancient Egyptians invented that concept 4,000 years ago. The layout of these houses was pure climate science. Most homes, even modest ones, were organized around a central courtyard. This wasn't just for aesthetics. During the day, the courtyard walls provided shade, creating a cool microclimate. At night, cool air would sink into this open space, and residents would leave their interior doors open to let this natural air conditioning flow through the rooms. Modern environmental engineers have tested reactions of these designs and found they can reduce interior temperatures by up to 15 degrees Celsius compared to outside temperatures without using any power at all. Even better, wealthy Egyptians in some public buildings had something called a malkoff, which was basically a wind catcher. Picture a tall shaft or tower that faced the prevailing north winds. As wind hit the opening, it got funneled down to the house, creating a constant breeze. Tomb paintings from the 18th dynasty actually show these devices on house roofs. When modern engineers tested reconstructor malkoffs, they found they could generate air speeds of 3 to 5 meters per second inside buildings. That's the equivalent of having a fan running constantly, except it never breaks down and never needs electricity. Speaking of roofs, Egyptian flat roofs weren't just architectural laziness. They were multi-purpose cooling platforms made from palm logs or reeds covered with mud. These roofs insulated against the sun during the day. But here's the clever part. At nights, families would carry their bedding up to the roof to sleep under the stars. Archaeological evidence from workers' villages show roof access stairs were standard features, not luxury additions. The temperature difference between sleeping on the roof versus inside could be as much as 10 degrees cooler. While we're installing expensive attic fans, they just moved their bedroom outside. Now let's talk about their water-based cooling systems, because this is where ancient Egyptians really showed off. They invented evaporative cooling thousands of years before we started calling it swamp cooling. The most basic version was something every household had: clay water jars called zir pots or quillas. These weren't glazed, which was the key to their genius. The porous clay allowed water to slowly seep through and evaporate on the outside surface. This evaporation process actually cooled the remaining water inside. Laboratory tests on recreated ancient vessels show how they could keep water 10 to 15 degrees Celsius cooler than air temperature. In 40-degree heat, that meant actually having a cold drink. But they didn't stop at drinking water. Egyptians figured out how to cool entire rooms using evaporation. They would hang wet reed mats or damp cloth on doorways and windows. As air passed through these wet barriers, it cooled down through evaporative cooling. the same principle your body uses when you sweat. Some households would even sprinkle water on their floors throughout the day. Modern calculations show this could reduce room temperature by 5 to 8 degrees while also increasing humidity in the bone-dry desert air. They basically invented the humidifier and air conditioner in one simple action. For those who could afford it, houses included elaborate water features. Archaeological digs have found remains of channels that ran through wealthy homes, bringing cool water from the Nile or wells. These weren't just for drinking. The channels were designed to maximize surface area for evaporation, turning hallways into cooling corridors. One preserved example from a New Kingdom villa shows a system that could circulate up to 200 liters of water per hour through the house. The cooling effect was similar to having multiple window AC units running. They even had public cooling systems. Major temples and palaces maintained large pools and fountains where anyone could come to cool off. These weren't just decorative. The surface area of water exposed to air created localized cool zones through evaporation. Temperature measurements around reconstructed ancient pools show they could lower ambient temperature by 3 to 5 degrees in a 10-meter radius. In crowded cities, these public water features were literal oases. Now here's something that will blow your mind about their clothing. While we're sweating in synthetic fabrics that trap heat, ancient Egyptians had figured out the perfect hot weather wardrobe 5,000 years ago. They wore linen almost exclusively, and there's a good reason. Linen is made from flax plants, and its fiber structure is unique. Each fiber is hollow, allowing air to flow through and moisture to wick away from the skin. Modern textile scientists have tested ancient Egyptian linen samples and found they have better moisture-wicking properties than many of our high-tech athletic fabrics. But it wasn't just the material, it was how they wore it. Egyptian clothing was deliberately minimal. Children went naked until about age 6, which sounds shocking until you realize it's the most practical cooling solution possible. Men wore simple kilts, basically wraparound skirts, and often went bare-chested. Women wore light linen dresses, sometimes just held up with straps, leaving arms and shoulders uncovered. When researchers calculated the thermal resistance of typical Egyptian clothing versus modern summer wear, they found Egyptian outfits allowed 40% better heat dissipation. The color mattered too. Egyptian linen was almost always left in its natural whitish color because dyeing was difficult and expensive. This turned out to be perfect for the climate. White clothing reflects about 80% of solar radiation compared to just 20% for dark colors. They were essentially wearing full-body sun reflectors. When you combine the breathable fabric, minimal coverage, and reflective color, ancient Egyptian clothing provided better cooling than most modern summer outfits. Even their grooming was heat-optimized. Both men and women commonly shaved their heads completely. This eliminated the insulating effect of hair and prevented sweat from getting trapped against the scalp. For formal occasions, they wore wigs, which could be removed as soon as the event ended. Imagine the cooling relief of taking off a hot wig and feeling air on your bare scalp. Modern heat stress studies show that cooling of the head and neck can reduce overall body temperature by up to 2 degrees. They also basically invented sunglasses and sunscreen in one product. That dramatic back coal eye makeup wasn't just fashion. The lead-based pigment reduced glare from the bright sun, functioning like the black eye athletes wear today. But it also had antimicrobial properties that protected against eye infections common in hot, dusty climates. Chemical analysis of preserved cosmetics showed they contained ingredients that could block UV radiation. After bathing, Egyptians rubbed their entire bodies with oils mixed with minerals that acted as primitive sunblock. One preserved formula included red ochre, which we now know provides SPF protection equivalent to about SPF 8. Let's move on to how they scheduled their days, because ancient Egyptian time management was a masterclass in heat avoidance. Work began before dawn, when temperatures were still in the comfortable range. Farmers, builders, and craftsmen would be up and working by first light, around 5 a.m. in summer. They knew they had maybe 4 to 5 good hours before the heat became unbearable. Archaeological evidence from workers' attendance records shows most heavy labor was completed by mid-morning. Then came what we might recognize as the original siesta. Around midday, when temperatures peaked, pretty much everyone stopped working. This wasn't laziness, it was survival. Tomb paintings and written records describe this midday break as standard practice. Workers should find shade under trees, walls, or temporary shelters and rest. Some would nap. Others would eat a light meal and drink their beer ration. Yes, beer ration. We'll get into that in a minute. This break typically lasted 2 to 3 hours during the hottest part of the day. Work resumed in late afternoon as temperatures started dropping. This second shift was usually lighter work, things like tool maintenance, planning, or tasks that could be done in shade. By sunset, another major activity period began. Egyptians were very much evening people by necessity. Cooking, socializing, and household chores often happened after dark when temperatures were bearable. The image of Egyptians as early to bed, early to rise is completely wrong. They were up late taking advantage of cool night air. Sleep patterns were totally different from ours too. Remember those roof sleeping arrangements? On hot nights, entire families would haul their bedding up to the roof. This wasn't occasional, it was standard summer practice. Temperature logger studies in modern Egypt show that roof temperatures at night can be 15 degrees cooler than indoor temperatures in traditional buildings. The Egyptians figured this out without any instruments, just by paying attention to comfort. They'd sleep under the stars with whatever breeze was available, then move back inside before the sun came up and started heating the roof again. Now about that beer ration I mentioned. Egyptian hydration strategy was genius considering they didn't have water treatment plants. See, Egyptians noticed that people who drank Nile water straight often got sick. We now know this was from bacteria and parasites, but they just knew water could be dangerous. Their solution? Beer. But this wasn't the beer you're thinking of. Egyptian beer was thick, nutritious, and low in alcohol, maybe 2 to 3%. It was made from fermented bread and had the consistency of thin porridge. Everyone drank beer daily. Even children got watered-down versions. Workers received beer as a part of their wages, typically 2 to 3 liters per day. The fermentation process killed harmful bacteria, making it safer than water. The low alcohol content meant it hydrated rather than dehydrated. And the grain content provided calories and nutrients. Modern nutritionists studying ancient Egyptian beer have found it contained B vitamins, amino acids, and minerals that helped replace what was lost through sweating. It was basically an ancient sports drink. But they still needed actual water, and here's where those clay pots came back into play. Every household had large water storage jars, and they'd figure out exactly where to place them. You'd find water jars in the shadiest, breeziest spots in the house, often near windows where air circulation was best. Some houses had special alcoves designed just for water storage, with openings to catch wind. The evaporative cooling from these jars didn't just chill the water, it also cooled the air around them. Having multiple water jars in a room was just like having several small air conditioners running. Their diet was designed for heat, too. Egyptians ate tons of water-rich foods. Cucumbers, melons, lettuce, and onions were staples. Watermelons, though not as sweet as modern varieties, were grown specifically for their water content. Tomb paintings show tables laden with these hydrating foods. They also understood salt replacement intuitively. Their bread was often gritty with mineral content from the grinding stones, which we now know helped replace electrolytes. They ate salted fish and used natron, a natural salt, in food preparation. Without knowing the science, they'd figure out how to maintain electrolyte balance in extreme heat. Timing of meals was crucial too. The main meal was eaten in the evening when it was cooler. Cooking during midday heat was avoided whenever possible. Many houses had outdoor cooking areas or rooftop kitchens to keep heat out of living spaces. For drinks besides beer, they made date juice by soaking dates in water, creating a naturally sweet, hydrating beverage. Some evidence suggests they even made a type of ice drink using water-cooled and underground storage, though this was probably rare and reserved for the wealthy. The Egyptian approach to hygiene wasn't just about cleanliness. It was central to their cooling strategy. Everyone bathed at least once a day, usually in the morning. Even poor households had basic washing facilities like a large basin and water jars. The morning bath served multiple purposes. It washed off the sweat from sleeping, provided evaporative cooling as water dried on the skin, and prepared the body for the oils and cosmetics that would provide sun protection. Throughout the day, people would rinse their hands, feet, and face frequently. This wasn't just ritual cleanliness, though that was important in Egyptian culture. Each rinse provided momentary cooling as water evaporated from the skin. Workers in the fields had figured out that splashing water on their wrists and necks, where blood vessels are close to the surface, could cool their whole body temperature. Modern sports medicine uses the same principle with cooling vests that target these pulse points. After bathing came the oils. Every Egyptian, from peasant to pharaoh, used body oils daily. These weren't luxury items, they were necessities. The base was usually castor oil, olive oil, or moringa oil, mixed with various ingredients. For common people, simple oil with a bit of scent was standard. The oil served multiple functions. It prevented skin from drying and cracking in the desert air. It provided a barrier against the sun, and it helped regulate temperature by reducing water loss through the skin. When archaeologists analyzed residue from cosmetic jars, they found ingredients like red ochre and zinc oxide, which we now know provide UV protection. The Egyptians even figured out strategic cooling points on the body. Tomb paintings show people with cones of scented fat on their heads at parties. As these melted, they'd release perfume, but they'd also provide cooling as the fat absorbed heat from the scalp. It's the same principle as those cooling towels athletes use today. For everyday wear, they'd apply extra oil to exposed areas like arms and legs, creating a protective and cooling layer. Community cooperation was essential for surviving the heat. Egyptian villages and neighborhoods were designed around shared resources and mutual support. Water was the most obvious shared necessity. In many communities, water was hauled from the Nile or wells by designated wire carriers through community work groups. The timing was always the same, early morning and evening runs to avoid the midday heat. These water gathering times became social occasions where neighbors would chat and share news while waiting their turn at the well. The physical layout of communities maximized shade sharing. Streets were deliberately narrow, sometimes just wide enough for a loaded donkey to pass. This wasn't poor planning, it was brilliant climate adaptation. Narrow streets stayed shaded most of the day, creating cool corridors for movement. Buildings were constructed close together so they'd shade each other. In workers' villages like Deir el-Medina, archaeologists have found evidence of covered walkways between houses, creating shaded pathways for the entire community. Any tree in a village was community property in practice if not in law. Date palms, sycamore figs, and acacias provided precious shade that everyone used. You'd find stone benches or mud brick platforms built around tree bases, creating communal cooling spots. During the midday break, these shaded areas would fill with people resting, chatting, or napping. The social rule was simple. Shade was for sharing. Tomb paintings show groups of workers eating lunch together under a single tree, maximizing the cool spot. Public water access was a mark of civilization. Temples maintained public fountains or water basins where anyone could drink or fill their jars. Some of these installations were elaborate, with multiple spouts and collection basins. The water was often flavored with herbs or flowers, making it more appealing to drink. During religious festivals, temples would increase water distribution, sometimes adding date syrup or other flavors to create special cooling drinks for the public. Communities also organized collective cooling strategies. In densely packed neighborhoods, residents would coordinate their water sprinkling so that streets and courtyards were dampened in sequence, maximizing the cooling effect while minimizing water waste. Even rooftop gatherings weren't just family affairs. They were neighborhood social hours. People would call out to neighbors on adjacent roofs, sharing food, beer, and conversation as temperatures dropped. These nightly gatherings reinforced social bonds while providing communal relief from the heat. The ancient Egyptians' relationship with heat went beyond practical measures into their spiritual worldview. The sun was both life-giver and potential destroyer in their mythology. Ra, the sun god, was worshipped for bringing light and growth, but his fierce midday aspect was feared. This duality shows up dramatically in the goddess Sekhmet, who personified the sun's burning heat. She was depicted as a lioness, as fierce and relentless as the desert sun itself. Egyptians believed her hot breath could bring plague and death. The mythology around Sekhmet directly addressed heat dangers. One famous story tells us how Ra sent Sekhmet to punish humanity, but she got carried away and nearly destroyed everyone with her burning fury. The god saved humanity by tricking her into drinking beer dyed red to look like blood. She got drunk and fell asleep. Her deadly heat finally cooled. This wasn't just a story. It was commemorated every year in the festival of drunkenness. People would drink huge amounts of beer, often tinted with pomegranate juice to look like the mythical blood beer, then sleep it off. The festival usually coincided with the end of the hot season, celebrating survival through the worst heat. This festival served practical purposes beyond religious observance. It reinforced the importance of beer as a safe, hydrating beverage. It provided communal stress relief after months of extreme heat, and it marked the transition to cooler weather with collective celebration. Modern psychologists might recognize it as a community-wide coping mechanism for climate-related stress. Egyptian paradise reflected their heat concerns, too. The afterlife was imagined as the field of reeds, basically Egypt perfected. Tomb paintings showed as an eternal oasis with pools of water, abundant shade trees, and constant gentle breezes. There's no burning hell in Egyptian mythology. Some scholars suggest because daily life under the desert sun was hellish enough. The ultimate reward for a good life was an eternity in perfect climate conditions, never too hot, never too cold, with unlimited water and shade. Even temple architecture reflected heat theology. Temples to sun gods often featured open courtyards where worshippers stood in full sun, experiencing the god's power directly. But these courtyards always had covered walkways on the sides where priests and worshippers could retreat to shade. Their message was clear: respect the sun's power, but protect yourself from it. Royal iconography showed us this too. Pharaohs were often depicted with servants holding parasols over them, showing that even god-kings need protection from the sun. When modern engineers and climate scientists study ancient Egyptian cooling methods, they keep finding techniques that match or exceed our modern solutions. The combination of architecture, scheduling, diet, hygiene, and community organization created a comprehensive climate management system. These weren't primitive people suffering through heat. They were sophisticated engineers who understood thermodynamics, evaporative cooling, and human physiology at a practical level. Their houses used passive cooling so effective that some modern desert buildings copied the designs. Their clothing provided better heat management than many modern technical fabrics. Their hydration strategies prevented heat illness better than just drinking water. Their community organization ensured no one faced extreme heat alone, and their spiritual framework gave meaning and structure to the challenge of desert survival. The ancient Egyptians proved that high tech isn't always better tech. Using only natural materials and careful observation, they created cooling solutions that were sustainable, effective, and accessible to everyone. While we rely on energy-intensive air conditioning that fails when the power goes out, their methods worked every single day for thousands of years. Next time you're sweating through a power outage or groaning at your summer electric bill, remember that 4,000 years ago, Egyptian peasants had figured out how to stay cool in worse heat than most of us will ever experience. And they did it all without burning a single fossil fuel.